Hello and welcome again to another Beth Radom video Dvar Torah. I'm Cantor Jeremy. Thanks for joining me. A lot has happened since my last video 3 weeks ago. Of course, Joe Biden became president of the United States. And for some reason, at exactly the same time, the late-night TV comedy shows like Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel have become a lot less interesting. And I say that with deepest respect, love, and admiration for the entire writing staff, which I don't have. While Toronto is in continued lockdown, the vaccines have also finally arrived, even though the rollout seems to be much less than optimal. But on the bright side, it does seem like whatever we're doing, it's beginning to look like we're finally making a dent in this pandemic. The latest graphs from worldometer.com show that the number of new cases in Canada seems to be declining steadily since New Year's. The same seems to be true in the United States and even worldwide. While our political leaders and news media continue to tell us that it may yet still be a while before we'll start seeing a semblance of normal human life, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling encouraged and confident that whatever it is we're doing, we seem to at last be on the right track. In the virtual Jewish world this past week, we celebrated the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, the birthday of the trees, or at least that's the way we teach it to our kids. In reality, the holiday of Tu B'Shvat was both historically and religiously just a date to mark the fiscal year for agricultural tax purposes in ancient Judea. But in the modern era, it has become a celebration of nature, environmentalism, and the delicious foods indigenous to Israel, and indeed the whole Eastern Mediterranean region, such as almonds, grapes, olives, dates, and figs, and pomegranates, foods that have defined the taste of the Middle East for millennia. On Wednesday, our little shul took part in the most amazing program, perhaps the first of its kind, a multinational virtual Tu B'Shvat Seder that brought together Jewish communities from Canada, the US, the UK, and Israel, all zooming together in common cause. One of the speakers was the great Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, with whom I had once upon a time had the absolute pleasure and distinction of serving alongside when I lived in London. And my own personal contribution to the program was a music video that I created of a brand new 5-part a cappella arrangement of the song Lo Aleicha, which we've also posted on the Beth Radom YouTube channel. And for some real fun, be sure to check it out. And I'll leave a link in the description and a card at the end of the video. Despite enormous hardship that the ongoing pandemic has brought on our world, one silver lining has been this new model we have for virtual Jewish programming and creativity that we might never have otherwise conceived of, which has now become a part of our lives. For this special Tu B'Shvat Seder, I chose the song Lo Aleicha for its universal message, reminding us that just because a project like saving our planet is too big to be accomplished by one person alone, that does not absolve any of us of the responsibility to be doing our part. While the quote from Pirkei Avot was referring to the restoration of the temple, the same could easily be said for protecting our environment. And if we think about it, the restoration of the temple, coupled with the bringing about of the Mashiach and a world of peace, this is inexorably linked with a world that has successfully achieved sustainable energy, clean air and water, and sure, carbon neutrality. It's only fitting that also this week, General Motors announced their plan to switch over to only producing electric vehicles by 2035. I think that it's so critical that we all take notice of major companies and businesses that make these kinds of commitments and recognize them for the bold steps they're taking. Because, let's be clear, overhauling any company, let alone a car manufacturing company, to be eco-conscious is a difficult and expensive goal that comes with a fair amount of risk. Difficult, expensive, and risk. 3 things that businesses usually try to avoid. Instead, to do what GM is planning will require trust in good conscience, faith, and dedication to the cause. Three more things that history has shown can sometimes be antithetical to good business. And as long as we're being honest, let's also recognize that the world does have a few more immediate priorities right now, like our health and, of course, our economy. If you were to say to me, investing in going carbon neutral is a nice idea, but right now we're kind of focused on making payroll and avoiding mass layoffs, I would have a very hard time arguing with that. But whichever side of the issue we may find ourselves on, we should be able to all agree that these examples of legitimate arguments that they deserve to be wrestled with, debated vigorously in the media and by politicians and within our own communities. Unfortunately, though, we can't. We can't because it seems we're still stuck on a much sillier debate on the validity of earth science in the first place. It's one of the sad realities of the misinformation age that we still seem to be stuck in. And it seems we will remain so until we can address some of the serious problems of the human condition that continue to plague our society. This week's special Shabbat is known as Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of Song, named so for the climax of the story of the Exodus from Egypt, when we read about the miraculous splitting of the Red Sea, after which, finally realizing that they were free from Egypt forever, the Israelites erupted in song. Ashira l'Adonai ki ga'ol ga'a. I sing unto God, for he is most exalted. Not long before, however, there was a moment that the Israelites were not so sure that they would make it. As they were cornered by the Egyptian army, and their backs up against the water, the Torah says that the Israelites cried out to Moses, Hamibli ein kvarim b'mitzrayim lekachtanu lanu lamut b'midbar? Were there so few available graves in Egypt that you took us out here to die in the desert? You heard it right. Sarcasm in the Torah. And if you ask me, it's still pretty funny for a 3,500-year-old joke. Nachmanides, the medieval commentator, however, doesn't think it's so funny. There were two groups among the Israelites, he explains, that when they saw the Egyptian army, one group cried out to God, while the other denied Moses and would not even admit to having been saved in the first place, saying that they would have better off been not having rescued at all. Now, I have to admit that if I had been there personally, watching the Egyptian army closing in with no obvious path of escape, I can't say for certain whether or not that at that moment I would be feeling so confident in Moses' leadership skills. Now, of course, I'm not going to debate the question of whether or not the events of the Torah are exactly true to history. But if I had been there, and it was my back up against the Red Sea with Moses beside me as we both watched the Egyptian army charge at us, in that case, we would also have to say that I had been personally witness to the first-hand personal witness to the 10 plagues of Egypt. Real proof that there was a very powerful God out there looking out for me. In a very real way, it would be a lot like if I were to go around saying the earth was flat. Then I spend 10 days with a team of world-renowned scientists who slowly and gently walked me through all of the math and physics in order to help me understand that the earth was undeniably round. Then I was personally flown up into space to see it with my own eyes, only to return to Earth a couple days later, whereupon I tell the scientists that they're just being silly, and that I know better, and then I go back to telling people that the Earth was flat again. It's actually infuriating. God must have been wondering why he should have bothered with the Israelites in the first place. And it could just be that the Israelites at the time didn't have a complete grasp yet of how the whole God thing works. After all, they had just spent 200 years in godless slavery. So perhaps they were just scared, which is absolutely fair. And it even makes sense to us because we see even today that it's human nature to deflect fear with sarcasm. But it is also that same sarcasm which shows a lack of humility in the face of the unknown and an unwillingness to admit ignorance. All of a sudden, it makes much more sense that those Israelites who saw the chariots of the Egyptian army and feared for their lives dismissed Moses and refused to admit that they had been freed, because what they feared even more was the idea of the existence of an all-powerful God to whom they would now owe their body and soul. It's no wonder they sang, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi chamocha nedar ba'kodesh, norati hiloto sefele. Who is like you among the powerful, Adonai? Who is like you powerful in the holy place, too awesome for praise, performing feats beyond understanding? So too, we can understand the fear that lives behind the skepticism when it comes to investing our lives and livelihoods into making the changes necessary to meet the very challenging goals of green living. We understand because it's even more terrifying to be forced to admit that our planet may be fragile, that our presence on it might be in jeopardy. It's true that maybe amidst a pandemic, now may not necessarily be the time for all of us to get on board with this particular agenda. But that time will undoubtedly come. And if we are all ready to acknowledge the reality before us and face our fears, who knows? Just like the splitting of the sea, we may yet see another great miracle. Shabbat Shalom.